Welcome everyone to our webinar, Winning in US Defense, Strategies from the Inside. It's great to see so many of you joining today. My name is Pranciškus and I work at the Innovation Agency Lithuania, where I help our defense and security companies grow internationally. Today, I will be the moderator of this session. Right now, at this very moment, we're planning a trade mission to the US alongside the North American Lithuanian Business Forum. And this is our third and final webinar in preparation for our mission. Today, we have our colleagues from Treble One who will provide their insights on how to work with the US Air Force from the inside. The presentation will be followed by a dedicated questions and answers session. You can post your questions via Facebook, and we'll address those submitted in advance as well. But to start, I want to hand over the microphone to our Chancellor Jūratė Usevičiūtė from our embassy in Washington, D.C. for a brief on the trade mission and the upcoming forum. Jūratė, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pranciškus. For this presentation, I will quickly switch into Lithuanian for convenience. Sveiki visi, esu Jūratė Usevičiūtė iš Lietuvos ambasados Vašingtone. Iš tikrųjų labai malonu matyti tiek daug susirinkusių žmonių, besidominčių Amerikos rinką. Ir siekdami tą susidomėjimą dar labiau paskatinti ir palengvinti jūsų kelią į JAV, mes organizuojame kasmetinį ekonominį renginį, tai yra Šiaurės Amerikos Lietuvos verslo forumą. Šiemet verslo forumas vyks balandžio 30 dieną, tai yra jau visai greitai Los Andžele. Ir tikrai kviečiam suskubti ir atvykti į Los Andželą mūsų kasmetiniam renginiui. Šis renginys visada sulaukia labai daug ir politinio aukšto lygio dėmesio, tai tikrai šiemet tikimės turėti ekonomikos ir inovacijų ministrą kartu su mumis, taip pat krašto apsaugos viceministrę, tai tikrai tikimės aukšto lygio dalyvavimo ir didelio susidomėjimo iš įmonių. Kad galėtume sukurti jums kaip įmanoma daugiau pridėtinės vertės, mes kartu su Šiaurės Amerikos Lietuvos verslo forumu organizuojame specializuotą verslo misiją, orientuotą būtent į gynybos, dvigubos paskirties ir kosmoso įmonės. Tai šita verslo misija truks 4 dienas ir apims apsilankymus Amerikos gynybos įmonėse. Taip pat turėsime specializuotą, mes tai pavadinom Lietuvos gynybos forumu, kurį organizuojame kartu su Los Andželo vienu iš inovacijų centrų. Tai bus puikia platforma užmegzti platesnius kontaktus ir platesnius ryšius su vietos ekosistemos dalyviais ir taip pat su federalinės valdžios atstovais. Tai aš labai tikiu, kad šis mūsų webinaras ir šita prezentacija, kurią jūs netrukus išgirsite, bus puikus įvadas į mūsų visas veiklas Los Andžele jau už 3 savaičių. Tai tikrai labai kviečiu dalyvauti ir registruotis. Dar turim laiko. Dėkui.
Thank you, Jūratė. Regarding the forum and everything, when we are going to send out a email afterwards, we will put in all the information regarding the forum, the upcoming trade mission, and the registration link for those who will be interested in joining at this stage as well. Now, let's move on to the pièce de résistance of this webinar. I would like to welcome our experts from Treble One, Chris Wimmer and Josh Berger, to present their insights into working with the US Air Force. Colleagues, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. It's an honor to be able to be with everybody today and share a little bit about Treble One, the U.S. Department of Defense, and how companies that are building emerging technologies can best engage with the U.S. Department of Defense. I'm Chris Wimmer with a company, a U.S. defense knowledge company called Treble One. I've been with the company for about 3 years. My teammate with me today is Josh Berger. In just a minute, we'll share a little more background kind of on myself and Josh as well as the company. But wanted to take just a quick minute to share some expectations around today. Our goal for this conversation today is that it's more of a conversation. It's not necessarily a conference talk or a sales pitch. It's more of a reality check. And we say that, and what we mean by that is that today's discussion is about how things actually work inside the U.S. Air Force and why most startups fail to break into working with the U.S. Air Force. And so this conversation is not necessarily a presentation so much as a conversation. We wanted to be candid. We wanted to be focused on stories, real life experience from both working in startups and venture capital, working as Josh will share a little bit of his background, working as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. This isn't theory. This is real practical experience from the lives that we've lived in the lives of those on our team. And we believe that it's going to be immediately applicable for companies that are building technology of importance for defense and security. So with Treble One, we sit kind of on both sides of the fence. And when I talk about the fence, I mean the government side as well as the industry side. So we sit on the inside of the fence where most of our team are made up of retired lieutenant colonels and colonels within the Air Force, as well as special operations. And then we also sit on the industry side, having built startups ourselves, invested into startups. And so the perspective we're bringing today is from both sides of the fence. A little background on myself, Chris Wimmer, Vice President of Business Development with Treble One. For the last 10 years, I've been working in the startup ecosystem. I'm one of the few people on our team that does not come with the Air Force background. I spent a few years building innovative biotechnology, wearable technology. I got to work with some wonderful Fortune 500 companies building this technology, which eventually pivoted into the U.S. Air Force, where we got to leverage wearable technology to monitor hypoxia and hydration status within fighter pilots, as well as looking at things like mental health conditions within intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance officers. So I've had a chance to build technology, move into the venture capital space where I was able to invest in technology and kind of bring all those worlds to Treble One to start to look at how do we take what we've been doing for the last 25 years and make this knowledge more accessible to startups around the world. And so with that, I'll share a little bit of background on Treble One, and then I'll hand it over to Josh to give his background. So I mentioned Treble One is a knowledge company. We've been around for 25 years, based in Ohio, in the United States, right across the street from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the Air Force Research Lab is, and where several Air Force program offices are. And there are several $1 billion that flow in and through the base for science and technology and the adoption and deployment of new technologies for the Air Force. And so we sit within walking distance from that base. We have been helping startups and small businesses for the 25 years, not just help them win contracts to be able to develop and use research and development to develop their technology, but to actually help them transition it into an operational capability. And what we mean by that is that it becomes a technology that's actually used out in the field. It's not just a science project. It doesn't just sit within a lab, but it actually gets used by end users and the warfighters. So we are thrilled to be here today and to be able to share a little bit out of our experiences. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Josh Berger, my teammate, to give a little background on himself.
All right, thank you, Chris. And just in general, I want to thank the Lithuanian Innovation Agency and Uraita for the opportunity to have this dialogue, have this the art of doing business with the U.S. Department of War and the various services is complex, no matter where you sit in the world. It's the bulk of companies within the United States that attempt to find their way to do work with the government, run into challenges, and those are only complicated one step further with a geographical border. But just rest assured, it's as complicated for anyone that's sitting in the United States trying to bring defense tech to the Air Force and to the Department of War as it is for anyone else. When it comes to me, like Chris mentioned, I spent the first 20 years of my career inside the Air Force. I'm an engineer by education. We'll talk about some different archetypes of organizations within the Air Force throughout the talk today. And so much of my resume is centered around those different archetypes. So at the earliest stages of my career, I was in the science and technology research area. I was working on pulse detonation engine development. The goal to discover new ways to propel aircraft and spend a good chunk of time researching, developing, and ultimately flying a new propulsion system in the early 2000s. From there, I switched from science and technology to the business side, the acquisition side of the Air Force. I spent a few years on the Global Hawk program, which is a large-scale unmanned ISR system. My focus there was predominantly on sensor and payload integration. And so there was a synthetic aperture radar, an EO/IR sensor, a ground moving target indication radar, a SIGINT sensor, all of those things trying to interoperate on a single platform for a number of years. After that, I was on the Predator and Reaper program. That at the early stages when unmanned systems were very early in utilization. So again, in that case, I was focused on payload integration, podded systems, and unmanned takeoff and landing. From there, I had the opportunity to work in the Defense Intelligence Agency. So I kind of broke outside of the Air Force and had the chance to work predominantly on U.S. Navy missions with unmanned surface and subsurface systems, doing a variety of different missions. Rapid development and rapid employment and training was the focus there. From there, I went off and got a degree in systems engineering, which really changed the way that I thought about the world. It sparked an interest in how the system works and how to leverage the system in different ways once you have that understanding. From there, I went back to the S&T community, the science and technology community, to do laser effects research. So now, in this case, another wildly different tech area, but in a leadership position focused on discovering the amount of energy that it requires to burn holes in things with high energy lasers. From there, more education and national strategy and defense, and then off to the Pentagon to be what we call a program element monitor in the Air Force. This position, I was responsible for the budget for all things enterprise information technology and defensive cyber warfare. In the job inside the Pentagon is very much about building the budget to determine the things that we need in the future and also to sustain the systems that we have today. And so my responsibility was to understand all of the programs and the dollars that were being executed across enterprise IT and defensive cyber, build the budget for what we would need over the future years, and then defend that budget to the Congress and the Senate as we were working with them to get approval. The process for budget approval inside the United States is the services build a request. Those requests work up through the Department of War, ultimately to the president, and then the president submits it to our Senate and House of Representatives for approval. And in the process of getting that approval, there's quite a bit of back and forth and questions and answers to try to make sure that we're putting the right budget forward, and it's something that the government outside of the Department of War can approve. Tremendous amount of learning in that job and really systemic understanding of how we do budgeting. From there, I execed within the Pentagon before departing and becoming the program manager for the Air Force One development program. So as you may be aware, but the Air Force One currently we're building 2 new Air Force Ones with Boeing to replace the one that's flying today. And so VC-25A is the one that's currently operating, and the VC-25B is a 747-8 a modified 747-8 that will be used for the next 20 to 30 years to support the president when it's completed. In that job, I also had the luxury of doing some innovation and startup work. And I think that's really what drew me to Treble One as I retired from the military. So I spent a few years working to infuse capital and work with small companies and to expand our defense industrial base around medium scale transport aircraft. Very proudly, we deployed capital to support a whole portfolio of companies, but 2 of those companies, as you might imagine, it's difficult to grow and scale a company, and so the majority of them did not make it, but 2 of them are flying aircraft today. I wouldn't say they're pretty aircraft, but they are flying aircraft today. They've scaled to billion-dollar valuations, and they have their eyes on, and they're being strongly considered for large-scale programs within the Air Force. All that to say, I'm just a guy I'm an engineer by education. I have an intense interest in the way that the business aspects of the Air Force work, and I have had the luxury of seeing it from a lot of different angles over the years. And I think my passion now that I'm not wearing a uniform anymore, is to help folks understand how it works, because I think that there's a lot of technology that doesn't make it to the department for reasons other than the right ones, right? So you want the best technology to make it. And if I can be part of helping get that there, wherever those technological advances are sourced from, that's where my passion lies. And so I'm just really appreciative of the opportunity to speak with you all today, and apologize for running long, but I'll hand it back to Chris and we'll start kind of the formal Q&A portion with him.
Great, thanks, Josh. Yeah, as you can tell, Josh has a lot of experience, that rich experience that you're going to get a chance to hear more about. So as I mentioned earlier, Treble One, we see ourselves as a knowledge company, a company that collects just incredible amounts of information through people like Josh and the other teammates that we have, as well as open source data and data from all the different conferences we go to and engagements we have with the Air Force and the broader Department of Defense. And we pull all that information together, and we want to make that accessible more to startups to help them along in their journey. And so there are a lot of consultants out there that will talk to startups about how they can help them win early research and development grants. Those things are important. But I think what's really important is being able to understand what it takes to be able to move through the maturation process from early stage all the way through to a deployed capability. And that's what Treble One's been doing for 25 years. So before we jump in, we do have some slides up. And if anyone has access to the QR code or the link here, we'd love to just kind of poll the audience a little bit to see who might be out there, who has the ability to respond to some of the questions that we have. So while you pull up the QR code and click on the link here, these questions are more just designed to help us understand what type of technologies are maybe being worked on, any sort of experience so far with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, and the stage and maturation of the company. And so I think if you're able to click on this code and answer some of these questions that I'm going to walk through, that'll help us orient ourselves and be able to speak more specifically to the companies that you're working on. So with that, I'll go ahead and move forward to the first question. So this first question is, which domain best describes your company today? And so the reason we have, while you're answering these questions, I'll go ahead and unlock it here. We'll give you a minute to answer. The purpose of this is because in the U.S., the Department of the Air Force is saying we need to invest heavily in these areas of science and technology going forward. And so whether that's artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, these are the areas that the government wants to continue to put, the US government wants to continue to put financial resources and personnel on to advance. And so if you're able to answer these questions, that's great. That will help us kind of orient, who's out in the audience and what technologies you're working on. So we'll give this just a couple more seconds here. I won't wait the full 20 seconds, but we'll see if anybody else wants to pop on and answer. And then I will go ahead and jump forward to the next question. So let's see, maybe I will wait, 10 seconds. We'll wait and grunt the silence, although I have trouble with the silence. So I'll just keep rambling a little bit till the time runs down here. Thank you. So it looks like we got heavy emphasis on manufacturing and other, which is important for us to understand, right? And then artificial intelligence and quantum. Next question here is, in what ways have you engaged with the Air Force or the Department of War? So U.S. Department of Defense, Department of War, there was a name change recently, Air Force. I'll go ahead and unlock this. If you've engaged with them, you can say you haven't yet. You've attempted, maybe you've worked and partnered with a U.S. company. You've put in a proposal, but maybe you weren't successful, or you're in discussions with the active military, or you're in discussions with a partner. Maybe you're awarded a contract, or you were awarded multiple contracts, and you're kind of off and running. At which point, we probably should have had you on here to present more than just ourselves. So, okay, great. So yeah, about half the group haven't engaged yet. The other half is in discussions but no contract. That's great. And then the last question here is, what is the stage of your company? So are you just getting going, or you're bootstrapping it, you're funding it yourself? And maybe, we'll ask some additional questions later on to help us understand what that means. But then all the way up to, hey, you've raised a lot of, so this is specifically from a funding standpoint. You raised a lot of maybe outside venture capital. Sorry, let me unlock it here. And then we have, maybe you haven't raised venture capital, but you're bootstrapping and you're above maybe $1 million in revenue and you're growing. All right, so it looks like we have a few answers here. And we'll give it a few more seconds. It's a good mix. So I think what you'll see as this wraps up here, for much of the group today, we have some folks. I'm sorry, I got one more question here for you. What's the level of maturity of your technology? So we use this scale, TRL, stands for Technology Readiness Level on the government side. And then what you'll see in parentheses is more of an industry term. So is your technology conceptual in nature? Have you already deployed it? It looks like we have some people that have already deployed their technology. Is it somewhere in the middle? And we're not going to go into this in deep detail, but what's important to the Department of Defense is, as you're maturing your technology, there's certain criteria that it has to hit in order to meet these TRL levels. So appreciate you all sharing this information. So I'll go ahead and jump forward now. We talked about this whole point of this session is to demystify the Air Force. And when we think of demystifying the Air Force, which you're going to hear us talk about, and Josh is going to spend some time in just a minute diving into these concepts a little bit deeper, but you're not just selling to the U.S. Air Force. You're not just selling your vision. You're not just selling your technology. You're selling to specific types of archetypes. Josh mentioned this a little bit earlier. And so when you're listening to Josh share today, we want you thinking through this lens of archetypes. We want you thinking about who you're selling to in particular. Who are you having a dialogue and a conversation with? Because each of these archetypes have different priorities. They have different potential budgets. They have different influence. And so as you understand these archetypes and you break out these archetypes, you're going to better know who you're talking to, when to talk to them, and how to talk to them. So the U.S. Department of the Air Force is not one archetype. When we think of startups, we think, you have your lenders, you have the people who capitalize your startup. That could be a venture capital firm, that could be a bank. They care about different returns on their investment. It's different than maybe working with Congress as another archetype. And so Josh is going to add some stories to this, but I want to run through the different archetypes and the way we think about it that's specific to not just a startup, but if you're doing business with the U.S. government. There are 5 different archetypes that we're going to go into. The first one is the science and technology community. So this is the community that's developing the latest, greatest technology. They're the PhDs, the researchers, the scientists. Then we have the acquisition community. The acquisition community, Josh mentioned he spent some time in the acquisition community. These are the people who are buying the technology. So as that technology gets developed, it gets matured, the acquisition community is in charge of buying. Then you have the operational community. This community are the ones who are actually using that technology out in the field. They're the end users of what you're building. And then you have the headquarters community. These are a lot of the influencers and those who are involved in policy and some of the decisions. And Josh will dive into that community a little bit more. And then we have the congressional community, which he touched on as well. So how do we actually work with Congress? How do you influence budgets, requirements, things that are really important for growing and scaling your company beyond just research and development on the science and technology community? So remembering kind of back to, the first questions we asked about, your tech area, your company maturity, these stories and the way you're going to think about these specific communities is really going to matter. So with that, Josh, I'm going to open it up to you. Each of these archetypes have sub-archetypes, right? So how do you think about helping this community that we're talking to today understand not just the Air Force as a whole, but each of these 5 archetypes, and then within those archetypes, what they need to be thinking about?
So I think I love the archetype framework because it's very actionable. So in trying to kind of demystify and make this knowledge more accessible, the first thing I want everyone to understand, the Air Force has a roughly 700,000 people in it. And almost all of them have a thought or an opinion about what we should be doing. But the more startling aspect to that is that of 700,000 people, about 89% of them have nothing, they are not involved in the business processes of the Air Force. And so the first thing is to know where the people that you're speaking with sits inside the Air Force ecosystem. It's a very large organization, and the Army is much larger. The Navy is roughly the same size. The Space Force and the Marine Corps are significantly smaller, but it's a very large organization. And the first part is the person or the organization you're talking to actually part of doing business? Can they spend or influence dollars to develop or purchase your technology? And so then when we look at that, there's really only 2. So the science and technology community is predominantly the Air Force Research Laboratory. And so when you try to understand how this group thinks, this is a group of PhD research focused members of the Air Force, predominantly civilians. There's a lot of contractors. There's a very small contingent of military within the science and technology community. They are interested in advancing knowledge, driving science forward. They're interested in partnership. They're not necessarily interested in buying technology. They, like many of you, are interested in developing and maturing technology to the point that you have a product or you have something to use. So view them, when you're thinking about engaging the science and technology community, view them as a partner. They would like to partner with you to advance research objectives. There's some great public resources. TechLink and DTIC are places where government research and government-driven patents are published and available to kind of review what research is happening, to get a better understanding of where those organizations and people are focusing their efforts. And as you approach them, how would you approach them for partnership? The other thing I want you to know about the science and technology community is that they have roughly $4 billion a year inside the U.S. Air Force. And then they have an additional approximately $1.4 billion per year to expend to achieve their mission. The extra 1.4 is through the US's Small Business Innovative Research Program. And those dollars are very specific, must be spent with industry, cannot be used for internal costs and overhead. And so that's $1.4 billion annually that the Air Force must spend with businesses that are smaller and focused on innovative research. So just a wonderful tool. There's a variety of different types of contracts. There's phase ones, which are around $75,000. There's phase two SBIR contracts, which are $1.25 million. And there's some really great scaling mechanisms that the Air Force championed about 5 years ago, that with matching funds from venture capital or from Air Force core dollars, you can get much larger. The StratFi is kind of the pinnacle of that, which is $15 million of SBIR dollars, as well as $15 million of core funds. So you can actually get $30 million from the Air Force to develop technology that you ultimately would sell back to them.
Yeah,
in recent years.
Oh yeah, sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
In just this year, as we've reauthorized, as Congress has reauthorized this funding source, they've also extended the StratFi, TACFi opportunities to the other services. And so now the other services, the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, and Space Force, all have access to those same kind of matching fund, larger scale, innovative research contracts. Chris, I'll pause there. I want to touch on acquisitions and then kind of the influencers, but you were about to say something that would be additive to what I was just talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I was going to ask to talk a little bit about the acquisition community. There's plenty of resources. I know we're throwing a lot at you all to be able to go to websites that can start to understand the funding mechanisms, the pathways to be able to mature from, as Josh said, the phase one up to TACFi, StratFi. And so these things can get pretty granular, and there's a lot of opportunity out there within the S&T community that Josh was mentioning. And so the acquisition community is really interesting because this is, again, how do you move beyond research and development? And so Josh, would love to hear you jump into the sub-archetypes within there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just one wrap up on the S&T community is that the science and technology community inside the Air Force is largely characterized as the Air Force Research Labs. There's some other entities that are in there as well, but the bulk of them are within the Air Force Research Laboratory. And then they are broken out based on technology areas, right? So you'll have aerospace systems, you'll have sensor systems, you'll have space systems. And as you narrow in from that 700,000 person service to the S&T community, to the subgroup within the S&T community, you'll find that the pocket that you're looking for is actually not that big. And so the art is to filter out all of those organizations that don't have equity overlap with you, and then know how to kind of engage and have a productive dialogue and seek opportunity. So the S&D community is a check writer. They're great at the early stage partnership, advancement, research partner. The acquisition community is late stage. So this group is interested in nearly fully mature tech. Predominantly, you're looking at organizations that when they do research and development, they're really doing system integration. They're taking a collection of high maturity subsystems, typically putting a large contractor on contract to bring those subsystems together and to ultimately field a capability like what you see on the screen, like the F-35. The F-35 draws parts from, I believe, every state in the United in the United States and from some other nations as well. And the role of the large primes, while they do develop technology themselves in some cases, is largely to integrate technology from various kind of subsystem subcomponent manufacturers. So the entry point here is there's a few things to understand, right? They're seeking mature technology. So if you haven't tested in a relevant environment, if it hasn't been used previously, that you may be early to engaging this group. They have a lot more money than the science and technology community. If the S&T community in the Air Force has $4 to $6 billion annually, this group has $140 billion annually to spend on research and development and system integration. The challenge is that they have nowhere near the flexibility that the science and technology community has. So this group is very much buying a system to achieve a set of requirements that have been set for them. And so it's important to understand, what are those requirements, who's setting them, what future requirements are coming down the road. And that is really the secret to success for becoming what we would call a program of record. These are large scale, multi-billion-dollar contracts to build integrated systems or be a part of integrated systems. In many cases, so I'll choose a manufacturer. Let's choose Lockheed Martin, which is one of the premier integrators for Air Force hardware. When the Air Force wanted an F-35, they competed with a variety of companies to integrate all of the systems necessary to achieve the F-35, and they gave the companies that were looking to do that integration work a large set of requirements, and then they came back and bid what it would take to do that. Ultimately, Lockheed Martin won, but then Lockheed Martin, they had to leverage the world's industrial base to achieve what they said they could achieve. And so in many cases, if you know that you had a potential hardware capability that could be a part of the F-35, Lockheed Martin was your customer, but Lockheed Martin is reacting to requirements set by the Air Force. And so in that case, the acquisition community, if you're not Lockheed Martin, the acquisition community is an advocate, is a influencer of Lockheed Martin's choices. And so if you have compelling technology that is outperforming some of the things that might already be on the list to perform a specific function in the aircraft, the acquisition community, in this case, the Fighters and Advanced Aircraft program acquisition executive would be the place to engage to gain that influence over Lockheed Martin's decision making. So the bulk of the defense industrial base worldwide is not Lockheed Martin. It is companies making subsystems, subcomponents, or providing manufacturing capacity, and understanding kind of how do you influence the decisions that Lockheed Martin is making so that you can be a part of that ecosystem is really what we want you to understand. Something exciting that's happening in recent years. So you may have heard of what the Air Force has called the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program. In this case, these are intended to be unmanned, lower cost, autonomous wingmen for things like the F-35 that's on the screen. And the Air Force has taken a much different approach to this program. Instead of, they have awarded contracts for integration, but rather than handing the keys to integration and a lot of the decision making to the prime contractor that's doing the integration, they've set government reference architectures in place and said, integrate within the bounds of this government reference architecture. And so then the US Air Force is keeping control of of buying at the subsystem level. So on that program, and for many of the programs that will follow it, your end customer as a subsystem or subcomponent vendor or a software provider or a AI skill provider will be the government. Direct technology will be handed off to an integrator, but it will be handed off to an integrator within the bounds of this government reference architecture. So that changes the game for where you engage and how you engage. And it's a very exciting thing for the industrial base that has typically you had to align to one contract or another. This would be a great point where we would love some questions. It starts to get complicated. But Chris, like the next two, right? The influencers are the ones that it adds a level of complexity. Happy to go into there. Do you want to add any color around the acquisition community before I go to the other ones?
No, I think that's good. Maybe we touch on the others, and then I want to follow up and kind of move to the friction, myths, and traction piece. So no, go for it on the other three.
So very quickly on the other three. So if you have two communities that can do business with you, the S&T community, acquisition community, then the question is, well, how do you influence the decisions that they're making, right? And so let's assume everyone that's on here that's listening is operating from a position of fantastic technology, right? Now the question is, well, sometimes bad technology is selected over better technology because of a relationship or because of a specific influence point. So in this case, really want you to understand who is influencing those two communities. And so we talk about the headquarters community very briefly. This is the group that's that's setting the requirements, setting the budget, and setting the rules that the acquisition and S&T communities need to follow. So they become a very important part. And so it's important to understand what they are signaling and what they're telling the acquisition and S&T community to go do. That will allow you to be ahead of what those communities are going to do in future years. We call that a first degree influencer. There's two second degree influencers. These are folks that are trying to influence the budget and the policy and the requirements that the headquarters archetype is driving forward. So the second degree influencers, one is the end user community. And so in the Air Force, we call them MAJCOMs. The MAJCOMs are very much, they have a specific mission, they have specific needs, they are training and equipping to go to war, and they communicate where they have gaps and where they have needs up through headquarters, but ultimately headquarters has to adjudicate what makes it into the budget. And the other one is the U.S. Congress. And so part of the process, part of the system in the United States is that the government sets the budget, and there are 50 states. There's 435 representatives from those states, and there's 100 senators from those states, each of which is looking to include opportunities that are beneficial to their constituents within their particular state. Just like URITA and the Innovation Agency is looking to find ways to advance to benefit the members of Lithuania. So as you think about this as an influence point, it's important to understand how Congress could be a beneficial player and influencer, because they do get to decide ultimately what makes it into the budget. With that, there's a whole masterclass to be had around congressional influence, and then congressional influence from an international entity is another level. So I won't try to get into all of that here. I can see our timeline dwindling. So let's address some other things, Chris, so that we
Yeah.
as much ground as
No,
possible.
that sounds good. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions within, and the reason there's so much time spent on these archetypes, right, is it's the framework for how you engage in all the other parts of what we're going to talk about. So we'll move through these other sections quicker, but that is really kind of the foundational. There's questions about, how does each of these archetypes define risk, who has power versus who appears to have power, and what makes these archetypes say yes or no to even good technologies, right? And so I think some of that will come out here in a little bit, but we're going to actually jump back to the slides here. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So if you don't have the QR code scanned, or if you can join at the link here, we're going to throw a couple other questions up here for you all to take a look at. But we're going to move on to really focusing on what's the friction within, for a startup within working in the Department of Defense, and then also any sort of myths that you might hear, or what is, how do you define traction and how to move things forward. So this first question is, and I'll go ahead and I'll give you all a chance to log in here again. But this next question is, what feels like the biggest blocker to you right now? And so this can look like getting access to customers, so those who are actually buying the technology are paying for you to be able to develop the technology, access to users. So that operational community that Josh talked about, is it, one of your biggest blockers is actually getting it to the warfighter to get their feedback. And so there's all these different things that we see startups run into over and over again. And depending on your blocker, depends on which archetype you need to engage in. So I'm going to unlock the question here. We'll give it 30 seconds to go ahead and pop up your answers. It could have potentially more to do with, the speed in decisions, right? For startups, speed is everything. So you might be able to get to users, you might be able to get to customers, but what you're trying to figure out is the process, right? How do you actually move things forward faster at the speed at which you need to move things forward? So it looks like funding, access to customers. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question here. Thanks. Next question is, what level of confidence do you have in knowing who makes the decision to buy your tech? So this question, is more around, of those archetypes, do you feel like you know them at all? Do you feel like you understand which ones are actually going to be buying it, and the decisions that they're making? So everything from 0, I have no idea, I have no clue, to I know exactly who's buying it. In fact, they've already bought my technology. So it looks like we have a little bit of a mix. I'm going to pause real quick on this question and ask Josh a question around, Josh, talk to us about the difference between enthusiasm and authority, right? Enthusiasm does not equal authority. So just because, startups might be meeting with somebody, the government's really excited. It goes back to the 700,000 number, right? Like, oh, we love your tech. We think it's going to solve all these problems. We're really excited about it. We're talking with everybody about it. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's authority or that there's influence to actually be able to go and buy it. So talk to us a little bit about that, and an example of how that type of confusion maybe has stalled companies for years, and how they can break through that confusion.
Yeah, I think what you'll find is that the Air Force is it's a very high tech service. There's a lot of folks are very proud of the systems that we have, and but there's a risk, right? That as a company, you only have so much time to dedicate to making connections, meeting people, and trying ultimately to sell and to develop. And it's important that you're talking to folks that can meaningfully impact the way that that's done. And so you'll find excitement from a lot of folks that have equity in the Air Force. And it's very important you understand which ones can, whether you have a good relationship that's worth nurturing, that's worth pouring into, that's worth traveling for, or whether this is an interesting conversation, but it may not result in revenue. So a key piece is understanding where they sit. And so using this kind of archetype model, I find to be very helpful. If they're in science and technology, or they're in acquisitions, and you understand what those organizations are. And part of, I just public service announcement on the tail end of this for those that attended, we'll share a document that kind of lays out the overarching architecture, filtering on your own. What are these different organizations, and at a high level, how can you tell which ones are in the acquisition community versus not, and which ones are in the S&T community, or not. And so we'll provide that as a resource to everyone that is logged in here today, and that gives you. So we're talking about this in broad terms, but we do break down these terms in a document that we're going to provide, and so you'll be able to get deeper. And if you have questions, we're happy to engage and answer some questions on that front afterwards. So I think the bigger thing, right, is excitement doesn't equal authority to act. And so what you're looking for inside those communities, once you know that you're talking with the right communities, now you're looking for who has dollars that they actually have authority to execute. And in that case, you're looking for someone that is a program manager at a level, so at the lieutenant colonel level. If you go too high, general officer, 2-star, 3-star general officer, they have dollars, they have authority, but they're not the ones that are they're not acting, right? They're not the ones that are actually going to award a contract. And so it's important and it's probably the hardest part, is getting to, it's easy to find the general. It's hard to find the person 3 levels deeper than the general that is going to award the contract, to do the work, or to sell the item. And that's an area that does take relationship building to get there, but also knowing that that the general is not the last step. It's the first step on your path to a true business partner.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question here for the group and unlock it. So what signals are providing you confidence you're making meaningful traction? So for those of you that are here, that are logged in, you've said maybe you've started engaging the U.S. Department of Defense, the Air Force, you have some traction, they're buying. What are those signals? So Josh is going to talk about in a minute, and while you all are answering, is how can pilots or demos or letters of intent, how can those things bring value, and how can they equally mislead for traction signals? So, what's the role that these things play without distracting startups, right? I think sometimes it's not just as simple as, hey, we either won a contract or we didn't win a contract. There's a lot of conversations that are happening behind the scenes that startups aren't necessarily privy to being a part of. And so there's these nuances and these words and these behaviors and these actions that we have to pay attention to very closely to understand what are those signals of traction. So some of you all mentioned interest in meetings, feedback and right questions from users, and asking questions. So Josh, kind of taking that and picking apart the traction signals a little bit more, how can startups actually understand what are these demand signals that you need to be looking for to make sure that things are progressing and moving forward? And maybe equally, what are the signals that are showing, hey, things are stalling or potentially dying off?
Yeah. So if you fast forward and you have the chance to engage, you'll find someone to meet with. I think it's critical when you're preparing for that engagement. You're going to prepare yourself to explain your technology, explain the opportunities, the costs, the timelines, maturity, etc. One critical piece of that preparation is, what are you going to ask at the end of the meeting, or in the mid? I love your technology. I'd like to work with you. How can I help you? What are you going to say? And so at that moment is your opportunity to really get a signal of how much commitment and how much traction you really have. And so when given the opportunity to make a request, whether I would encourage you to know what you can ask for, like what can they do for you? Different communities can do different things, but really seeing them do more than just talk is the signal you're looking for, right? And so then the question is, if you ask them for something that's fairly low work, right? A letter of support means that they have to actually go coordinate. They have to put their name on paper and say, yes, we support what this company is doing and we'd like to see it go further. You can leverage that for to show traction for venture capital. You can leverage that to show traction for a small business innovative research contract. Other ways where traction is a very strong signal is when they have to do work, right? A CRADA, which is a cooperative research and development agreement, is a really good signal that they're interested. It takes some work to do. It allows you to begin a more formalized but low cost. There's no cost to doing a CRADA, but it allows you to formalize your relationship and begin having more reason to interact and talk with that group. And so as you progress toward contracts, the level of work that they're willing to do to work with you is a demand signal that you can take to the bank, right? And so when you meet, make sure you have something to ask for, and then their reaction to what you asked for is a key part of whether they're a serious partner for you or if they're just saying nice things to you in the meeting. And so just know what you can ask for. And again, this is an area, if we had hours and hours to chat or work together, we could explain like, whoa, these are the things that you can take away from a meeting or ask for at a meeting with a particular group. Over.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, we want to have a few minutes and give some time for some questions. So I want to make sure I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and see if you can spend 5 minutes. I'm going to see if I can pull up the slides here. One of the things that we want to share with you all, I'm going to jump through some of these questions, is a couple slides of interest where we focus on, these are the archetypes we've talked about. So you'll see up here the acquisition community, the headquarters, the science and technology. We'll see down here that operational community, which we call the MAGComs and the COCOMs, in Congress over here. We talked a little bit about what they do, what do they care about, what can they do for your company and technology, they ask. We have something that is going to be shared with you that starts to break that down. So it provides the next level of granularity, answers those questions that Josh talked a little bit about. But Josh, I wonder if you could spend a couple minutes before we get to the questions talking about the budget. So, the important thing, right, is at the end of the day, there needs to be some money in order to be able to build the technology. And if we're going to get this technology into the hands of the warfighter, we have to understand that we have to move beyond just private capital. We need to be able to leverage government funding as well, and maybe merge the two together. Help us break down the Air Force's budget a little bit and how this works. Maybe take a couple minutes on this slide and then a couple on the next, and then we'll jump into the questions.
100%. So the budgeting process. So yesterday or the day before, if you were watching U.S. news, the president announced the request for the budget in fiscal year 27. So this is the net. It's not the budget that's in execution right now. It's the budget that would hopefully be approved on September 30th, 2026. And that is predicted to be $1.5 trillion. The request is $1.5 trillion with a variety of areas that are kind of being reduced in focus and a variety of areas that are being increased in focus. I know we have an AI company on here. So the AI company, UAS and counter UAS, made it into the top 5 things that were investments of that $1.5 trillion. But that's a 50% increase over the largest defense budget that the United States has ever had. So that budget, when we talk about this FY27 budget, we're looking at, in the key observation block here, we're looking at the budget number 3. And so as you're engaging, this is the part that I want you to understand, is that there's actually 5 different budgets that you could be influencing at any one time as you work your engagements with the Department of War. So while they're talking about the fiscal year 27 budget for a future appropriation, the 26 budget is still in execution, so you can access those funds. The 25 budget is still in execution, so you can access those funds. So that's 4 and 5 on that list. And then as you think about your influencers, so we talked about the headquarters, we talked about the end users. Well, the budget itself, when they're building the budget, so that's a year away. So right now, the FY27 budget request has made it from the services through to the Department of War, up to the president, and over to Congress. And as soon as that happened, the Pentagon started working on the 2028 budget, right? And so when I was in the Pentagon, this is when we shift from, all right, we just delivered our homework. Now we're going to shift and we're going to look and say, all right, well, 2028 is going to be here before we know it. We need to make the plan for that. And then so 2028 is what the Pentagon is working on right now. So that's an influence opportunity. And then the POM, which is the Program Objective Memorandum. This is when the end users are building what they think they need. And so the budget for FY29 is in work as well, but it's happening inside the end users. And so as you're engaging, you might be meeting with the end user community. You need to be thinking about what budgets they're considering. Those could be 3 years away. If you're engaging with the headquarters, you want to be thinking about the budgets that they're influencing. And by thinking in this way, and by looking at all 5 budgets simultaneously, this is how you build to something bigger than just one contract. Because while you're pursuing a small business innovative research contract today, you want to be influencing a much larger contract in the future. So what you're seeing on this slide, and I realize we don't have I wish we had a lot more time, but what you're seeing on that slide is really the timelines for deep into the process for when influence points are peaked, are optimal. And so if you want to influence end of year dollars, things like execution dollars that are a little bit easier to secure, you want to do that in February through March through unsolicited proposals into the acquisition community, because there's some events that are tied to the budgeting process that make them more open to spending with speculative or earlier stage technology in the February through March timeframe. I could go through each of those highlighted lines on here. You're going to get this chart for your reference on the tail end in the package. So I won't belabor it, but understanding that there's actually 5 different budgets at any one time to be influencing is important.
Hey, Josh, real quick before we move on to the questions, can you spend 30 seconds talking about this slide? So I think what Josh is getting at, and what you're going to receive after this event, is this is the playbook we wish founders had before they first engaged the Air Force. Like, this is the playbook to help understand when you're going into these conversations. You need to understand how the system works, how the budget works, how the archetypes think. This is the playbook that you all will receive at kind of a high level to help you understand. All right, let me make sure that I'm communicating effectively and understand that I'm not wasting anybody's time or my own time, making sure I'm pointing in the right direction and talking with the right folks. So maybe just break this example slide down in 30 seconds, and then we'll move on to the questions.
Yep. So we talk about archetypes. And so when we're doing this, we're going to go look. We want you to understand how much money does this archetype control, and then who has authority to leverage those dollars. And so in this case, the S&T archetype, they have roughly $4 billion a year over the next 5 years. Additionally, they subdivide that into a bunch of different organizations. And so there's actually 53 total different program elements, sub pieces of the budget that are executed by all of those organizations in the middle. And then the last thing, very briefly, is on the left-hand side, we talk often about technology readiness level. That's kind of an engineering metric about how ready you are to be utilized for an actual mission. In the budgeting world, they talk about budget activity codes. And so they roughly trace, but on the left-hand side, budget activity 1 is very early stage research. Budget activity 7 is much more mature. And so what you can see here is over a given 5-year period of time, the bulk of the S&T community's money is going to be spent at budget activity level 2, which is applied research. And so this is taking science and turning it into technology and engineering. And the other thing to note is that there's a rapid drop off of funding the more mature you get in this community. And so if you bring in ready to go TRL9 technology in your pitch to this community, it's going to fall flat, right? And so part of success when engaging is understanding what they can do for you and where they're interested. And this group, they get less and less interested the more mature your technology gets. It's just the nature of where they fit into the overall technology ecosystem for the Air Force.
Yeah, and Josh, if I could make a quick comment on that too, for the group to understand is, and when we talk about maturity, some of you might have a product that's already in the commercial market. You may already have a product that's deployed. But what's important to understand is if you have never worked with the U.S. Air Force, well, you might think that your product is mature and ready to go. The Air Force might say, and you start saying, well, I don't necessarily need research and development dollars. I don't need to talk to the science and technology community. I'll go straight to the acquisition community. The acquisition community is going to say, this is great that you've already deployed it. This is great that you've already worked in the commercial market with it. But have you worked on my use case? Do you have the certifications and the authorities to use it for my use case? And so what happens is you kind of get stuck in this, well, we just want to sell our technology. We've already proven that it works. And the Air Force is going to say, well, you need to start with the science and technology and make sure that you are adapting it to their use case, right? And being able to go do the research and development to get it there. So just wanted to make that comment. Real quick, before we move to the questions, I want to jump to let me see here. I think I have, a couple questions for you all. If you could pull the QR code back up, and then we'll capture these questions and then move on to the questions that you all have. So I'll throw this up here for 30 seconds. What do you need next on your journey? So as you're thinking through your startup, the phase that you're at, what's most important? Do you need just more general education like this about the Air Force? Do you need something that's more specific where you say, hey, I'm developing this defensive cyber capability, and I need to know exactly where it fits within the Air Force, maybe something more specific? Are you needing somebody that's working with you day in and day out on the business development front? Curious to kind of see where you're at and what's needed. And then the next question is, how do you want to engage with more information like this? Do you like panel discussions and debates? Do you like interactive workshops? Do you like just getting material and being able to read and kind of work through it on your own? Or do you like more of kind of a one-on-one interaction? So we'll leave that up for about 15 seconds. And then we're going to jump forward. I think I may have one other question after this, and then we'll jump forward to the questions that we have from you all. All right, I think that's it. Thanks so much. All right, so jumping forward to the questions that we have on your end. I think one of the questions we received was, so large companies, Josh, we'll kind of open this up to both of us here, but large companies often seek fully integrated or turnkey solutions. So given the focus of some companies on components rather than complete assemblies, what are the most realistic and effective market entry points for them? And so as we think of, I can go ahead and jump in real quick on this one first, and then Josh, would love to get your thoughts. But for me, it's all about establishing partnerships. So when you think of on the US's side, you think of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. If you think of more non-traditionals like Anduril and these other emerging prime companies, how can you start to pull them in on opportunities that they can't pursue because they're too big? There's a lot of funding that Josh talked about for small businesses. These large companies can't go after those opportunities. And so if you can show the Air Force that you're already thinking about how you can integrate your technology in with these larger players, and you're partnering with the right organizations early on, I think that's a great way for these startups to start to engage with these larger companies. So Josh, anything you want to add there?
Timing is critical. As you look at as you're looking at budgets, as you're looking at opportunities, if the new opportunity is emerging, right, it's pre-acquisition, it's not been awarded to anyone yet, the opportunity, if as a subsystem, subcomponent, or manufacturer, the opportunity is to engage with a potential competitor at the higher level, right? So if Lockheed Martin and Boeing competed for F-35, there was a point in time where the Air Force had not picked Lockheed Martin. And if you wanted to, so approaching a potential competitor is a great way to find your way into the opportunity space before the final decision's been made on a major system. Once the decision's been made on a major system, that doesn't mean that the prime contractors have already decided who's going to do the subsystem subcomponent work. So the opportunity isn't over there. And then just last piece, especially on these kind of fully integrated systems, as the way the department is contracting is changing, like collaborative combat aircraft and things to follow. Secretary Hegseth has really driven this open system architecture, government reference, competition, direct sale to the government at the subsystem subcomponent level, driven that forward as kind of a mandate for at least for the next 3 to 5 years for new acquisition programs to follow.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Next question was from the crowd here is, what are the most effective strategies for a small components manufacturer to integrate into the supply chains of large defense or aerospace corporations? Josh, you want to start with this one and then I can add on?
Yeah. So each of the manufacturers, U.S. manufacturers, there are, one, be mindful of regulatory requirements for the manufacturers. So if you're a prime contractor, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Anduril, et cetera, in the process of winning a contract, there are a litany of regulatory requirements that are highlighted inside the federal acquisition regulation that you can access without partnering with the company. But you have to understand what are the rules that they're being required to follow and ensure that you're also following those rules. They won't all universally apply to you, but some of them will. And the companies that have the prime contracts will flow those requirements down. So first, step one is just ensure that you are compliant so that they can say yes to you. The second part is to understand the entry point, right? So each one of these companies, the larger companies, are going to have a supply chain management team that has portals so that you can gain access, so that you can figure out what are the unique requirements for that company, and also the regulatory requirements that you have to meet to be able to participate in any particular contractual effort. Again, relationships are king. Meet the folks, attend conferences where you're going to be able to kind of engage the OEMs where they already are, and get your foot in the door and make them aware of you.
Yeah, one thing I'll add on is Josh is right. They all have these portals. They all have different processes. The small business offices are pretty easy to reach out to and engage with, right? Their contact information is going to be on the main websites for, the Raytheons, the Boeings, all the big primes. The key is once you get into their system and now you're an eligible vendor, to stop engaging the small business office. They're going to work with you and say that they'll get you connected to the right programs and the right people. This goes back to business development, engaging the program managers and the engineers directly, the ones working on the programs, the ones working on the projects. The small business office is really there to make sure you're compliant, right? You're in their system, your technology has been, they've gone through kind of the due diligence, but it really is about engaging the program managers and the engineers that are working on the program where your technology can insert into. Next question. How should we approach market entry when a direct competitor manufacturing similar systems and components is already established in the United States? I can go ahead and jump in first here, right? I think this comes from, my background, spending some time in startup world, spending some time in venture. I think it's important to be aware of your competition, but don't get so fixated on them, right? Focus on crafting your differentiation message, right? The US and we need multiple manufacturers to de-risk, and you have to show how you're different, whether that's from the size, the weight, the power, the cost of what you're building, the speed to produce it, the volume at which you can produce it. Craft those messages. If you and a competitor are developing the exact same thing, 100% same exact thing, but you can do it 10 days faster, or you can do it 2x cheaper, you're going to win. And so that differentiation message is really, really important. Josh, you want to add to that?
I think understanding the timing of when there is and preparing accordingly, but understanding when the incumbent may be up for reconsideration. So often once a contract is awarded, the incumbent is going to have that work locked up for a period of time. But we do recompete, we do reevaluate. I say we, the government, I'm not on that side of the fence anymore. The government does recompete and reevaluate and fairly publicly make it clear when contracts are expiring. And so if you're looking to unseat the incumbent, if to provide a service or to provide a hardware element, make sure you're tracking when their contract is up and build your relationships and prepare a compelling proposal so that you could potentially unseat them. Yeah. And
next question.
Before we jump, I think I want to give Franciscus, and I know I'm butchering your name and I apologize, but I think he may have some questions that have come directly from the audience real time. We have a couple more questions that you had provided us along the way here, but is there anything that you'd like us to address with we have about 12 minutes left.
Yes, so the only question that went in through the chat right now is about contact information, so that will be provided to all registered participants. But I have a question for you regarding your conversation. I think what also is interesting to our companies is the way to approach the US market in terms when you are from Europe, right? From Lithuania, for example, and you have your manufacturing base here, be it components or end items. How to approach this when you're trying to win contracts with the US military?
So a big piece, and I had the luxury of speaking with, and I won't say their name, but speaking with a Lithuanian company this week and in past weeks, and understanding the kind of requirements for those regulatory requirements that will allow for you to be in the competitive ecosystem. So the Defense Department, there's certain things that we reserve for U.S. companies. There's an amendment, the Berry Amendment, which is very focused on the U.S. textile industry, and so we try to buy textiles from within the United States unless you can't. But for a lot of tech, as an allied nation, the door is open as long as things like the bill of materials is adherent to the regulatory requirements that apply to U.S. companies, but would also apply to a European company a European nation like Lithuania. And so I would encourage look at the federal acquisition regulations. There's a lot in there, and so that's not an easy thing that I just said, but by looking at that, you can ensure that you're already compliant. And so the other piece is, especially in software and chip manufacturing, there's a lot of questions about where those things are coming from and if we're inducing cybersecurity risk. And so being able to provide and be prepared to provide kind of the bill of materials and the origin of a lot of the materials is going to be critical. There is just a little bit of skepticism, and that's something that we have to work through, right? So anyone that's on here that's looking to capture U.S. defense business, it's been done. The U.S. Defense Department of War does buy technology from other nations, and there's a lot of parts from all over the world included in a lot of our platforms. Question is, let's just don't rule yourself out in advance. Know what things you need to meet. And so very proudly, the company I was speaking with earlier this week, thank you, Uraita, for helping us get connected. They are already compliant with the requirements that would be needed for them to have a fighting chance at securing U.S. work. So that was really good news to hear.
Yeah, great.
And my follow-up question would be regarding a presence in the U.S. For example, establishing a company, a subsidiary, moving manufacturing lines. If you're that, if you really want to capture the U.S. business, is that a shortcut, would you say, or a prerequisite, or what?
Yeah, that's a great path forward. I can jump in real quick and just say there's a lot of economic development organizations we work with across the United States that have access to incentives and opportunities for international companies to come in and set up manufacturing lines, to set up a US based subsidiary, and can help navigate that process. And so part of what you can do in terms of finding those opportunities is also looking at the congressional landscape, looking at the incentives across the U.S. to be able to support subsidiaries. We've worked with a number of companies, international companies that have set up U.S. subsidiaries. Every state in the United States has different programs and access to capital, access to talent. One of the questions that we're going to get into here in a minute was asked by the group of what are the funding mechanisms. There's some federal funding mechanisms that can help support the growth of your company, but there's state run and local and regional run funding mechanisms that can help you with tax incentives. It can help direct cash grants. If you win a federal contract, let's say a small business innovation research grant, which is a mechanism for early stage research and development, the states will match some of those funds as well, right? So understanding all those pieces, and these economic development organizations and partners we work with can help you navigate what state might be the right state for you to set up your subsidiary based off what it is from a strategic standpoint the company's looking to do. So Josh, you were going to say something?
I think just, do you have to, if I'm listening to this, do you have to create a presence in the United States to win government contracts with the Department of War? No, you don't. Will it benefit you? I believe so, right? And so we talk about Congress as a second degree influencer, right? That is 535 members of the United States that are out there advocating for the people that are in their states. And if you are bringing presence, bringing manufacturing capacity, bringing people, all of those things help put Congress in your corner and help turn them into an advocate, because ultimately a partnership with a Lithuanian company within their borders can turn them into an advocate for expansion of the defense industrial base in partnership with a Lithuanian company. So does it benefit you? Yes, I think so. The Department of War does not think about that as much as the U.S. Congress thinks about that. Okay. But ultimately the U.S. Congress has to approve the budget, and they have the ability to influence the budget strongly in your favor or in the favor of one of their constituent companies. And so think about that on this kind of complex chessboard that is influence. I don't think it rules you out, but if you're looking at the second degree influencer that we call Congress, it certainly will help help drive things forward. Over.
So I can go ahead and jump in with another question that was shared with us. If an equivalent version of our proposed system and components is already produced in the US, under what conditions would US companies still see value in working with us?
So I think you started to answer that before, Chris, which is how do you separate yourself? Is the system, the fielded system, all it's cracked up to be? Often they're not. Or if there's a system that is fielded, the question is, when is it due for upgrade? When is it due for modernization? When is it due for replacement? And is there an appetite to diversify systems so that there's more options? I think as you look at like exquisite weapon systems like the F-35, we don't often, we're not buying a new or a variant of an F-35 and fielding two systems. The complexity and the training and all of the support is too high. When you look at small UAS, counter UAS weapons, I think the US Department has a much stronger appetite for higher level of competition and more players in the defense industrial base in those areas. And so if you're in software, if you're in AI, if you're in small UAS, if you're a subcomponent manufacturer, I think those opportunities are kind of always open. In the large scale, fully integrated systems like an aircraft carrier, like a destroyer, like an F-35, like a satellite, those we don't do that often, and we tend to keep them for a very long time. But the subcomponents are recompeted. Modernization happens on a regular basis. So at the subcomponent subsystem level, the opportunities don't end. So separate yourself from the competition and look for an opportunity in a modernization contract. Keyword modernization when you're searching for budget opportunities.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I'll add too is, you mentioned this before, Josh, and it's almost like don't negotiate against yourself, right? Like there's companies, startup companies, a lot of them will fail. A lot of these companies that are potentially building these subcomponents, where you're looking at them and saying, well, it looks like they're already developing something in the US. We don't know what factors are making that company go. They might appear successful, but they might run out of capital. There might be something that happens with leadership, right? And so there's always a look from the government side as well as industry side at what is the risk of only having one vendor, right? And how do we have more vendors that are developing new capabilities? So don't count yourself out without giving yourself a shot. All right, I think we're coming up on time. So I know there were a couple other questions that I think we can probably address in maybe an email that when we reach out and supply some resources to you all. But maybe just kind of some final words of wisdom, Josh, from you, some parting words, and then we'll hand it back over to kind of close the session out.
Just very briefly, and then I want to make sure Franciscus has, I know I'm butchering your name. I promise I'm going to work on it, man. This opportunity that has come up for Treble One and the Lithuanian Innovation Agency it's very exciting to me. The defense industrial base has felt fairly static in the US for a long time. And the appetite for evolving and emerging is as high as it's been in the 20 years that I spent inside the Air Force. I think there's just a tremendous appetite right now to see new innovation spark, and to not spend all of the defense dollars with the names that people have become used to hearing. And so that's very exciting to me. And then also just the fantastic technology and that your nation is producing and testing in the real world today is something where there's a lot of US companies. I think something that really that's very impressive is that a lot of US companies have neat ideas, but they have not been battle tested. And the companies that I've had the opportunity to engage with so far from Lithuania, they're not saying the same thing. These are technologies that have been battle tested and in a way that is more existential. And so I think there's a real advantage to the companies that are hopefully on here listening that you have based on where you're at and the things that you're doing right now. And US companies do not have that advantage. And I think that's something that you can advertise as a strength.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll just say is, the companies that succeed aren't always the ones with the best tech. The ones that understand how the archetypes and system actually work and they adapt early, those are the ones that win. So just keep that in mind. It's not always just about the best tech. You need to understand the system and the processes. And so with that, we just want to say thank you so much again for the invitation to be able to share with you all a little bit about the work that we've done and the incredible startups that we have the opportunity to work with, and just grateful for engaging with you all, and want to hand it kind of back over to the Lithuanian team to close us out here.
Yes, Chris, Josh, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, building on what Josh just said about our tech, looking at our end items, I mean, every company that produces a working product that could be used by warfighters, if it hasn't been tested in Ukraine on the front lines, it's not a product. It's just a prototype. That's the everyday situation for us, right? And us being so close to Ukraine, it's an advantage. And our companies understand that. And yes, I think that's a strength for us, and lovely for you to underline that. But all in all, it was a great session. Thank you for your conversation, and thank you for all the information. We will be sending out the info package about you with the slide deck to all the participants that registered, even to those who didn't join us. That always happens. But we are very grateful for your time. And this is the end of the webinar. Have a great evening. And for you guys in America, have a great day. And thank you very much again.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.